Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. For those of you in the audience who are new, my name is Leslie Huey. I'm an assistant professor of urban and regional planning here at the university. And I want to welcome you all again to a talk tonight that's going to be given by Shirley Sherrod. Before we do that, we're going to jump into some quick announcements. First of all, we have only 4 classes to go. For those of you who are community members and not registered for the course as a student, we just remind you to please RSVP before you come to the next 4. We'd like to hear a little bit about who we're attracting to these classes. Next week, two of our next speakers are going to be doing additional events in Detroit. So next week, Samina Raja will be speaking here on Tuesday night, but she's also going to be speaking in collaboration with Seed Wayne at Wayne State University. We're going to do a second event in Detroit on Wednesday evening from 5:30 to 7:30 at Eastern Market. We'll put this up on Canvas for students so you get more information. And if you're community members and you want to know more information, there are flyers that the Detroit Food Policy Councils and others have been sending around, but please talk to us afterwards and we can give you the details. And also, Dara Cooper is coming the week after that, and she's also going to be doing a second event on April 10th from 6 to 9 at Vanguard CDC, also in Detroit. So we'll do the same thing. If you want more information, please come talk to us afterwards. We'll put information in the newsletters as well. For community members who are signed up for newsletters, you'll have more information about this there as well. For the students in the audience, although all of the community members, I'm sure, are also welcome to always volunteer, but there's extra credit for those of you that are taking the class to volunteer at D-Town Farm in Detroit starting this weekend on the weekends, either Saturday or Sunday. And there's 4 of you already signed up to volunteer this weekend, which is great, but they can always take more students. So email Elise if you would like to sign up this weekend or the following next couple weeks. We also announced and have information on Canvas for students in the audience that we now have paid urban agriculture internships in Detroit at Oakland Avenue Farm and at D-Town Farm. Does anybody in the audience need a clicker to participate in the polling questions that we're going to have throughout the talk? Just one more person. And remember to please return these if you're a community member. And then finally, we have a great opportunity for students in the audience. This is open to anyone who wants to register and pay to attend, but the organizers are graciously offering students in the audience free admission. If you're really fascinated by and want to help with trying to think about food procurement, local food procurement, and sustainable food procurement by institutions like the University of Michigan, we're having a conference here on April 9th from 8 to 5 p.m. with speakers from all around the country and kind of brainstorming and thinking about how to advance local food procurement, sustainable food procurement. So we will also put this on Canvas for you to get more information and to register if you're interested. Finally, we want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do this course without support from the School of Environment and Sustainability, the Office of DEI, the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, the Center for Engaged Academic Learning, CEW, and Francis Sidney Lewis Visiting Leaders Fund, Seed Wayne at Wayne State University, the School of Public Health here at the university, and also Urban and Regional Planning Program here at the university. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Winona to introduce our speaker.
Hello, I'm Winona Bynum. I'm the Executive Director of the Detroit Food Policy Council, and I am so pleased to welcome and introduce Mrs. Shirley Sherrod. I also want to welcome everyone from Detroit. So we had a shuttle of folks to come from Detroit, so welcome everyone. But I'm pleased to introduce Mrs. Shirley Sherrod. Shirley Sherrod is a longtime civil rights activist who has worked on behalf of Black and rural farmers. After high school, she attended Fort Valley State University, and she later majored in sociology at Albany State University in Georgia. During this time, she devoted her time to civil rights issues alongside and with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that's where she met Charles Sherrod, who was a minister and her husband now. Shirley proceeded to attend Antioch University in Yellow Springs, Ohio. She earned a master's degree in community development, and she would later return to Georgia and the job with the Department of Agriculture in Georgia. She was devoted to helping minority farmers keep their land. In 1969, Sherrod co-founded a communal farm project called New Communities, Inc. Mrs. Sherrod also worked with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. Her aim was to assist African American farmers and help them to hold on to their land. Today, Mrs. Sherrod is the Executive Director of the Southwest Georgia Project for Community Education, SWGP, a nonprofit organization she co-founded with her husband in the 1960s. SWGP is currently working to establish a facility where farmers in a 20-county area can bring their produce to be processed and shipped to various markets, including school systems. And she is also the recipient of the 2018 James Beard Foundation Leadership Award. And to get your clickers warmed up, I have the first clicker question. Which of these is not true? And if you listened, you may know. What do I need to do? Oh, I'll click BB. Oh, press B. B, then B, okay. You could tell, okay. I have to exit. Thank you for helping me. Oh, close it. Ah, okay. You never know. I used to work in technology. Okay. Did everybody get their choice? It's good? Okay. All right. So, you can listen. You will enjoy listening to her because not too many people got the right answer. So, A, she and her husband actually co-founded in 1969, not 1984. And I just want to tell a short story before I welcome Mrs. Sherrod to the stage about when I met her. I met her at a dinner. And I was completely excited to be standing next to her in the buffet line. And we struck up a conversation. And it was such a great conversation. And she, well, this is in my mind, she invited me back to her table to sit with her and have dinner. I'm not sure if I just followed her. But we had dinner, and the conversation was great. And really what I took away from that is just how approachable she is, and also how willing she is to share her experiences and her lived experiences and all the information that she possesses if it will help someone. So I hope that this will be enjoyable to you, and you can enjoy her conversation just as much as I did over dinner. So I welcome Mrs. Sherrod.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening. Oops. Oops. It rose near the. I hope you don't mind that I'm sitting, but you know, I started out working on the farm picking cotton. I don't know whether that had something to do with a bad back in later years, but I have issues with my back these days, and have to do the best I can to preserve what little I have. I don't want surgery. So it's great to be with you and great to have the opportunity to share a little with you this evening. It was 54 years ago last night that I made a commitment to stay in the South to work for change. My father died 54 years ago yesterday as a result of being shot by a white farmer who was not prosecuted. And it had happened so much in Baker County, Georgia, that, it was my father. I just couldn't understand what was going on. But prior to that, all I wanted to do was get away from the farm. I didn't want to have anything else to do with agriculture again in my life past high school. And I wanted to get away from the South. And my father would have been happy if we had all just stayed there and built houses around him, he and my mother on the farm. And so I couldn't share my dreams, that I had no intention of living my life in the South. But once my father died, I made the commitment to stay. I felt I had to give something up, and what I gave up was my dream of leaving the area. So I decided I would stay and devote my life to working for change. I was 17 years old, a senior in high school, and didn't know what I would do. I just knew I would do something. And of course, SNCC came into the county. My father died on March 25th. SNCC came into the county during June, and we started the Baker County movement. And I saw that working in the civil rights movement was one way I could begin the work of living true to the commitment that I made. And that has led me to so much work. It started in the county. I later married Shirley Sherrod, who was one of the founding members of SNCC. And so that work then stretched to other areas in Southwest Georgia, and then other areas across the South, and trying to figure out what we could do to help make things different for landowners as well as people living and working on farms in the area. And because people were being put off the land because of their activism in the movement, then we came up with this idea of creating a community. But I want to tell you a little about Southwest Georgia. Let's see. One of these got a picture on it. But and I know we have to deal with the question of the evening, but I want to sort of help you understand where we've come from in Southwest Georgia. So the land that we own was, with the Treaty of 1814, the Lower Creek Indians were there. So with that treaty, the land was taken from them, and the leaders in Georgia at that time decided they would take the land and break it up into 250-acre tracts for white farmers. This was during the time of slavery and so forth. But what happened, the big, richer people in other parts of the state and in the Carolinas started coming in and buying up the land and putting together big plantations. So they basically changed what had been envisioned for the area into, and if you go there now, there are all of these plantations all over everywhere, and they love to take their name, like Haynes. There's a Cena plantation, Haynes spelled backwards. There's Nilo plantation, there's Olin spelled backwards, so you can go around the area. The people who own Victoria's Secret have a big plantation. Woodruff, who was chair of Coca-Cola before he died, had a 33,000-acre plantation and left it as a research facility when he died. So my family, we were landowners because my folks settled there and sharecropped until they could buy land, and they helped each family member to buy land. So where I grew up, It's called Hawkinstown because they were Hawkins and had probably, we never added it all up, but somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 acres. But Itchaway was all around us because what they did, even today, some of those, there's a guy who's trying to put his plantation together. He has quite a bit of land, but he keeps trying to approach my family members about getting their land, and he stays down at the tax office to try to figure out who owns what and who hasn't paid taxes. And so we still, even though that happened in earlier years, it continues to happen today. I just wanted to share with you something W.E.B. Du Bois said about the area and souls of black folks. He said, at Albany, in the heart of the Black Belt, we stop. 200 miles south of Atlanta, 200 miles west of the Atlantic, and 100 miles north of the Great Gulf lies Dougherty County. Dougherty County is the county where Albany is located, with 10,000 Negroes and 2,000 whites. The Flint River winds down from Andersonville. Andersonville was a cemetery. It was a camp for prisoners during the Civil War, cemetery at this point. And turning suddenly at Albany, the county seat hurries on to join the Chattahoochee and the sea. For a radius of hundreds miles about Albany stretched a great fertile land, luxuriant with forests of pine, oak, ash, hickory, and poplar, hot with the sun and damp with the rich black swamplands. And here the cornerstone of Cotton Kingdom was laid. Du Bois went on to describe the depressing daily grind African American farm workers faced in 1898 Dougherty County. Among this people, there is no leisure class. Here, 96% are toiling. No one with leisure to turn the bare and cheerless cabins into a home. The toil, like all farm toil, is monotonous, and here there is little machinery and few tools to relieve its burdensome drudgery. The land on the whole is still fertile, despite long abuse. For 9 or 10 months in succession, the crops will come in if asked. Garden vegetables in April, grain in May, melons in June and July, hay in August, sweet potatoes in September, and cotton from then to Christmas. And yet, on 2/3 of the land, there's but one crop, and that's cotton, that leaves the toilers in debt. So I grew up in this area, and let me say, the land is still rich. While Albany is rich in natural resources and agricultural potential, many of the residents are economically insecure, and the overall population is deeply divided along race lines. Now, Albany's 2010 population was 70. We were almost at 100,000. And if you look at the map, Lee County is west and north of right down to the city limit. And that's where we had the original 6,000 acres where we tried to create a community, and were literally run out of there. And once the foreclosure happened in 1985, the new owner dug holes and pushed all of our buildings into them. Today, Lee County was just a little country county, but today, because of its proximity to the city of Albany, white flight from Albany went just right at the city limit, where the city limit ends, north and west, is Lee County, and that's where white people have gone. So when you look at the statistics for the area, everything is always good for Lee County. Everything is always bad for Albany and Dougherty County. The white people in Lee County continue to come in and take the jobs, and then they take the money back out across the line. So I know I'm here to talk about food literacy and food access, but I needed to paint a picture for you that started way back with slavery, and not much has changed. There's so much racism involved in everything that happens in the area that we can't grow. Our young people don't want to stay, so we're losing them. We've lost population in that area of the state, so we don't have much influence anymore. All of our young people, everyone wants to be up around Atlanta. When I talk to people and they say, oh, I've been to Georgia, and my next question is where? And I know they're going to say Atlanta. You know, that's the other Georgia, you know, and I say that to them. So now I think I can show you that map to, let's see. So there we are. So that's Southwest Georgia, and okay, I should look. I want you to see Lee County, and where the white population in the area has gone. When you look at maps, you'll see that everything else will be dark because of all of the poverty and unhealthy eating and lack of access to food. You won't see that for Lee County. So as I said, my work started 54 years ago with the civil rights movement in the area. And if you're gonna work in Southwest Georgia, you can't get around agriculture. You can't get around with organizing farmers and others in those rural areas. So where I had vowed to never have anything to do with agriculture again in my life, I found as I started organizing farmers into cooperatives. I just give you a quick story. I organized my first cooperative in '87, and the farmers wanted to raise feeder pigs. So I told them, you have to be trained in order to get the animals from the Heifer Project. And they said, we know how to raise hogs. They didn't, you know, these were my father's friends, you know, and who am I, they thought of me as a little girl, to be telling them what to do. Well, it turns out they didn't know how to raise hogs. And I tried to get the University of Georgia Extension to come in to train them, and the guy wouldn't even talk to me. So I said, okay. You know, I grew up on a farm. I had uncles who were extension agents in other parts of the state. I said, I can do this. So when I went in and started training at the next meeting and talking about clipping eye teeth and castrating hogs, it's like, wow, you know how to raise hogs, don't you? I didn't have any more trouble from them beyond that. And that happened a lot with farmers as I prepared business plans and worked with them through the years. Now, one of the things we have trouble with, even though we still have quite a bit of land that we own in the area, we don't eat healthy food, and we don't have people teaching us to eat healthy food, and we don't grow the food that we need to grow. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody had a garden, everybody in the rural area. Now I can come into your cities and find children who can talk to me more about growing food than I can young people who got all the land in the world around them to be able to grow. When I was growing up too, we had what we call, let's see, the white people were future homemakers of America. We were new homemakers of America, but we had our classes teaching us how to cook, how to sew, and so forth. None of that is in the schools anymore. Now, in some of them you still have 4-H, but they have not attracted young black students as much as white students. in those programs. So I need to stick to my slides. So you'll see, you will see here that you'll see the child poverty rate in the various counties, some of them more than 50%. And just about everyone is on the lunch programs, the free lunch programs. You see that, you'll see Terrell County, let's see, where's Terrell? Was the first place my husband came to when he was in SNCC. He was the first field secretary for SNCC. And Terrell County was the first county that he went to start organizing. Now, they were shooting at him so bad that he retreated into Albany and was successful at starting the Albany movement. But my daughter is the school social worker there now, and it's just, I mean, the conditions are really, really, really bad. As someone who worked for school integration, and we thought that was the answer, what we used to say, once schools were integrated, the white teachers figured out how to teach around our children. So if you try to build in racism to everything you do, eventually it starts, did I change it? I'm sorry. Eventually it starts filtering into everything. And eventually it starts filtering not only into black people that you're trying to hurt, but white people as well. It's the region that begins to suffer as a result of the conditions that you're deliberately creating. You know, 13 of the 14 counties in Southwest Georgia exceed the national average, and Calhoun, Clay, and Terrell are greater than 35%. And again, 13 exceeds the national average for child poverty. And as you can see, I think Lee is on here. You see how Lee is? Okay. And they will tell you when people are moving into the area, the real estate agents say they are not doing it, but they do it. I know my son was working with Procter & Gamble in Iowa and moved back for a while. And even though he was from the area, they were trying to steer him into Lee County. So they've tried to take the best of what we have to put it in Lee County. And so they will tell you the best schools are in Lee County, although if you look at the figures in Albany, a lot of those schools score better than Lee County at this point. But when you're so set on keeping people down, and it's almost like fighting the Civil War all of these years. You know, you didn't win, but you're trying to win in other ways at this point. And I don't want to sound so negative, but I'm trying to help you see this is what it really is. This is what we have had to deal with through the years and try to organize around. Out of the 159 counties, 6 counties got the highest rate of food insecurity. 6 in the state are in Southwest Georgia, you know. So, and then the lunchrooms want to be able to serve locally grown food, but they don't want to serve, they don't want a bunch of collard greens. We eat a lot of collard greens down there. They want collard greens that have been cut, washed, bagged, and ready to go into the pot when they are delivered to the schools. So if farmers are being shut out of if they are struggling on their farms trying to hold on, and we've lost, around 1910, black people own over 15 million acres of farmland. Today we're down to about 2 million acres, if we have that much. Most of our farmers, and it's due to lack of access to credit, and a little due to the fact that we had people who moved away from the farm and moved into Detroit and Chicago and other cities, but remembered that they have some interest in a piece of property down there, and it's their property, and end up forcing a sale to get, what, a few dollars. Some of them find that they think because they're in a big city and land is so valuable there, that that little piece of land down there on the farm is just as valuable, and it's not. But so we are in an area where in Albany, we've had every grocery store in South Albany and East Albany to close. Now you have Publix, you know, they only locate in high-end areas. So of course you can find them in West Albany and Lee County. You cannot find them in South Albany or East Albany. And it's made it very difficult for our people to be able to get to good food. So you have Dollar General, and that's located everywhere, it seems, with processed food. And that's what folks have available. We have been planting gardens with young people in the schools, boys club, and I wanted to tell you about a young boy. He stood back. We're working with all these kids trying to plant cabbage and other vegetables, and he's standing back and not helping and just looking. So we asked him about it. He said, well, I don't eat food from the earth. It has nature on it. So, really? So where do you get your food? He said, from the grocery store. So we had some farmers there. He was about 8 or 9 years old. We had some farmers there, and the farmers started talking to him about where that food comes from. And he said, stop, stop, stop. That's gross. You know, he just couldn't believe that the food he was eating had nature. You know, all he knew of it was that it had nature on it. Now, in Sunday's paper, and I definitely wanted to share this with you, I told you earlier that there are 159 counties in Georgia, and Albany ranked 157 out of 159. You know, it's terrible because we could do so much more. We could do so much more. So part of what we've worked on through the years is trying to work with farmers to get them to where they can grow more and find markets. I could tell you some horror stories where we've worked with farmers to try to get them. I'll just share one little quick one with you. In Thomasville, Georgia, there's a state farmers market. It's an auction market. In Brooks County, Georgia, there's some excellent black farmers who grow really great vegetables. But they couldn't, every time they would go to that auction market at the state, and it was a state farmers market, the buyers would get together and not really buy, or if they bought from them, it would be at a much, much lower price. We know that because once or twice they got a white farmer to take their vegetables through, and they get a much better price. So we tried dealing with that and couldn't have a breakthrough. In fact, Oxfam America did a documentary called Cultivating Opportunities back then. It was based on our work in Brooks County, Georgia, and they highlighted a farmer who was really playing a major role in trying to organize the co-op, Willie Head, and compared Willie Head's work to Selena Kosa, who was in Mozambique. They said even though he was from one of the richest countries in the world and she was from one of the poorest, their work was the same. We eventually did get a stall for one of our farmers on the state farmers market that had refrigeration. So our farmers, we found markets in Atlanta. The farmers could bring it there. The buyers complained, those other farmers on the market who were bringing their produce in complained and said they would stop selling to the guy who was also buying from those farmers if he continued to buy from them. So we had to stop bringing the produce into that area and went to an old school, and the farmers, 4 of them had signed a note at the bank to try to get a refrigerated truck that cost $7,500, because we started having to truck the produce into Atlanta, which was 200 miles away, and the truck would break down a lot, so it wasn't feasible to be able to continue doing, that work. We eventually then connected with Red Tomato in Boston to grow. We could grow seedless watermelons in Boston, Georgia, and ship them to Boston, Massachusetts, and get more than they could locally for the crop. And that worked for about 5 years until a drought came, and of course our farmers didn't have irrigation, and that affected the quality of the melon. So we've really tried to work from helping farmers to stay in business, and to try to work with local school systems to try to get some produce into the schools grown by our farmers. But again, the problem is having an aggregation site to be able to bring that produce in, to properly handle it so that it can be shipped out to the areas. So this building, in 2015, a group out of Wisconsin gave us an old Winn-Dixie store building. It's about 46,980 square feet. It's too bad they didn't give it to us when the store closed. They waited 2 years. So there's some issues with trying to we don't need all of that, first of all, as an aggregation site. We just need the back part of it with the refrigeration and so forth. But there is so much more. They gave us the building and almost 3 acres of land, 3.98 acres of land. Ideal is right there's a 4-lane highway right there next to it and all. And I just thought, wow, finally, maybe with this gift, the city of Albany, the county, will try to work with us to make this happen. No way. And in fact, they're making us pay taxes. Even though we're a nonprofit, they are making us pay taxes. Money we should be using to do the renovations on the building. And we've made all kinds of presentations trying to get the economic development group to come in and help us, community development. The school system has talked about the need. And again, no one can see what having this facility could do for residents of Albany and for residents throughout Southwest Georgia. See, farmers then would those who own the 100 acres, the 50 acres, they can grow and bring it into this facility to be properly handled, which allows them then to pay taxes and to be able to live on the land, but also bring produce grown from this area into not only those in Albany, but like I told you earlier, people don't plant gardens. My mama is 87 years old. She's still planting her garden, and people come to her house to get some of her vegetables when they could just plant them themselves. So part of what we're doing is also trying to get people to understand what it can do just to take a few seeds and plant them. So working with schools in Albany, working with schools and helping to set up pop-up markets in these counties is the best we can do right now. We cannot renovate this building without help to make it happen. I think I have a question for you. Okay. So what percent, no, I don't have that one. I don't want that one, right? Is that the one on wasted food? Okay, Okay. Okay, of the average dollar spent on food, what share goes to the farmer and farm workers? Yeah, very good. That's true. 11% goes to the farmer and farm workers. So much has happened. The other thing I need to tell you about the area, when the work out on those farms in Southwest Georgia ended for a lot of the people living on those. So those plantations that I mentioned used to have a lot of black people living on them and working on them. And that changed. So where did those folks go? They came into Albany. And that's a lot of what you have, a great mix of people from throughout Southwest Georgia who were once farm workers, now living in Albany. And so they're not your well-educated, jobs aren't there. You ask the average white person in Lee County and they'll tell you, oh, Albany is just full of crime. I think part of what happens, yes, there's some murders and so forth that go on. I think that happens in most places. But I think part of what happens, a lot of that happens in Lee County. Not as many murders, but a lot of the crimes, and they don't report it. Even in the schools, they will report something really bad from the Albany schools, and it's happening. I know because I know people who work in the Lee County school system, and they finding drugs and other stuff all the time, but you don't hear about it because that's supposed to be your best school system and your best, your better people. We pulled students together in 2014, and the subject was a better Southwest Georgia. What would it take as a young person to keep you here? And there were some very good things that came out of those young people, and we presented the report because we used the Fannin Institute out of the University of Georgia to help us. But do you know we couldn't get one elected official there? Not one. And they came from about 6 different counties in the area. So we just had another one about 3 weeks ago. They came from 8 counties. We did get 2 elected officials to come. But you would think they would want to hear from young people, what would it take to keep you here? What do we need to change? What can we do? And those young people were dead on it. They were, even the Lee County students used the Farm Bill in 2014 to look into it to see what the Farm Bill held that could be helpful to the area. And they actually designed, and they were free to put together whatever they wanted to. They actually designed a program for black farmers from looking at what they saw in the Farm Bill. So there's hope, but you don't have people who really want to work with them to try to pull that together. We're still fighting the Civil War. Okay, the most important factor to consider when working to improve food access and food literacy is, use your clicker. Wow, you all are great. That's true. We have owned land, haven't had the access to credit that we should have. Just think of how beautiful it could be if we could work together. Some of you probably saw the story of what happened with me when I was at USDA in 2010. the white farmer had come to me, and I think it was 1986. And at that time, I thought all white farmers got everything they needed from the agency. I really couldn't understand why he would come to me. And I actually took him because I really didn't think he needed much help from me, not the kind of help that I had given to black farmers through the years, because I had to go in those offices and literally fight for them. And there were many times when I thought the county supervisor was going to jump on me because I'm pushing for the rights of whatever farmer I was there trying to help represent. So I didn't think that happened to white farmers. So I took him to someone else, and then eventually saw that that person, who was a white attorney, wasn't doing anything to help him. In fact, he sat there in front of me one day once the farmer had gotten a foreclosure notice and said, "Well, y'all getting old. Why don't you just let the farm go?" I couldn't believe he was saying that to them, so I started in on him. I'm saying they have paid you all this money and you haven't done anything. And see, he had a timetable at that point. He had gotten the foreclosure notice, and his farm would be sold at the courthouse steps on the first Tuesday in June. So we had to work fast. So I got on that man so much, he said, okay, he would work on it. And then the farmer called me. I think we were like 3 or 4 days before Memorial Day. This is getting to the first Tuesday in June, to say they're not doing anything. He's not doing anything. So I'm sitting there. I called everyone I knew. I was calling in-state and out-of-state, saying I have to find a lawyer who can file a Chapter 11. See, what the agency did, they took his farm and rented it to someone else without his permission. And therefore, he couldn't farm the previous year. And that's one of the criteria for being able to file a Chapter 12 bankruptcy. So that kept him from being able to file Chapter 12, which was the best bankruptcy chapter because it was for family farmers. So now I got to find somebody who could file a Chapter 11. And after I exhausted my search, I was just sitting there in my office saying, I just don't know what. And then I thought about this lawyer who was just 40 miles away. And I had gone to that lawyer with one of the black farmers. So I called him and I said, I got this case, we got to file. Otherwise, the farm will be sold the first Tuesday. I said, we need an 11 to stop the foreclosure. So he said, how soon can y'all get it? I said, you tell me. He said, what about tomorrow at 10 o'clock? Well, this farmer was like 60 miles south of me, so I called him and said, we have to be in Americus, Georgia at 10 in the morning. So they picked me up, we went there, and that lawyer said, I can take an 11 and do what I would have done with a 12. Now, what I learned throughout this is that the issue where I thought all white farmers got all of the rights, I learned that that's not the case. It's about being poor and not having access. So if you're not connected and you're a poor person, whether you're white or black, I learned that was my transformation. So Breitbart didn't know that when he chose me, when he targeted me. And I tried to tell the people at USDA, not only did I save that farmer's farm, but we became good friends. No one would listen. No one would listen to me. And so I'm way over in another part of the state when they initially told me I was being put on administrative leave, and then before I could drive through Atlanta, they were telling me the White House wanted me to resign. And before I could get to Athens, I had a 3.5-hour drive. They said, we want you to pull to the side of the road and use your BlackBerry to submit your letter of resignation. I can tell you that was a very, 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 very low period. But I said, okay. I pulled to the side of the road, and I sat there with that little BlackBerry and pecked out, with my one finger, a letter of resignation. But I did tell them, you haven't heard the last from me. So that night a reporter called me, and after I went on to Athens and got my car, went by the apartment, got a few things, went by my secretary's office and gave her everything I thought USDA wanted from me. And my keys, my ID, everything. And then I had a 4-hour drive home. But a reporter talked to me after I got home after midnight, and the story started turning around. And that white farmer who didn't know I had talked about my transformation for years, his family saw me on TV. And their son, the son's wife, saw and said, look, he said, oh, that's my mom and dad's friend. Got in his truck and went to their house and said, your friend is on TV. They started calling CNN while I was on the air. And that's when the story started turning around. So I've gone, you know, my initial commitment was to help black farmers. And I realized with this case, I had to help poor farmers. I had to help people who were not connected. I had to help anyone who really needed the help. That's when I changed. So trying to rebuild a food system that's more equitable is something we work on a daily basis. In fact, I called back today, we had a workshop going, and Congressman Bishop's representative Amber was telling me, he said, this is the best workshop I have ever attended. And we are doing this all the time, trying to make the changes that need to be made so that people can have better access to food, so that farmers can have better access to markets, so that they can make a living on the land that was passed down to most of them, land that had been acquired after slavery ended, land that they are trying desperately to hold on to. So I don't want to go too long. I want to leave open time for questions or discussion from here, because you know, after 54 years, you have a lot of stories you can tell.
Any questions? Who wants to be first?
While they're thinking, I can share one additional thing with you. So when we started trying to develop that community, because people were being put off the land owned by white farmers if their children tried to integrate to school or they tried to register to vote. So we got the 6,000 acres, and then that was foreclosed in '85. We joined the Black Farmers lawsuit in 1999, and 10-year battle. And I can tell you, I was so busy helping other farmers to file claims, I almost forgot about our law. So I'm driving from Alabama one night, and the light bulb went off. Oh my goodness, we were farming in 1981. We can file a claim in the Pickford case. We did, but we entered a 10-year, nothing has ever come easy, I can tell you. 10-year battle. I can tell you that the lawyer who was working for the Justice Department was arrested 2 years after our hearing in California. Turns out she wasn't a lawyer after all. Yes, I mean, that's just, she worked for the Justice Department, y'all. Anyway, that's just, yes. But anyway, after 10 years, we received a payout in the Pickford case, in fact, the largest payout. And we bought more land, which was a former plantation, one of those plantations. We are I don't know how many plantations in the area, but I would guess somewhere 100 or better. We, as black people, own one of them now. Yes. And the things we are trying to do from there, not the training, the marketing, the help for other landowners in the area is part of that work.
Can I just ask a quick question, clarifying question? I don't know that everybody in the room has actually understood what went on with the Breitbart case. So that part of it, I don't know that is really clear to people, why you were asked to resign so suddenly. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So being the first black person to hold a position as Director of Rural Development for USDA in Georgia, everybody wanted you to come on the weekends. I was getting all these requests to come and speak. So this group in Douglas, Georgia asked me to come and speak at their NAACP banquet. And initially I was thinking, no, it was like yesterday. It was my father was buried on March 27th. This was March 27th. And but then I said, okay, I'll do it. So what I did when I went there, I try to use my life to say to people, if you look at all I've been through, all of the things that have happened, if I can set this aside and try to work with anyone, then we should do that. So I was telling the story of my work with the white farmer to try to pull people in to say, come on, y'all, it's time for us to start working together. Well, Breitbart took my speech. Someone sent it to him. He took my speech and cut and spliced it to make it appear that as a government official, I refused to help a white farmer. I've told the story from 24 years earlier, but he made it appear that it had just happened, and I did it as part of my duties at USDA. So he put this out there, and the administration, it was awful. They didn't want to hear anything I said. At rural development, a farmer would not come to rural development to save his farm. A farmer would only go to rural development to do added value to a crop. For example, if he was raising peanuts and wanted to make peanut butter, then he could come to rural development for something like that. Otherwise, you just wouldn't have a lot of farmers. They do rural development as sewage issues, community facilities, housing, and so forth, but not direct services to a farmer. That's Farmers Home Administration, Farm Service Agency, as they call it now. But no one wanted to listen. They were so afraid of Breitbart and the right that they were just ready to throw me under the bus, and they did. But they were dealing with, I guess they didn't do enough vetting to know my history. Because I told them, you haven't heard the last of me. I knew I would come out of there fighting if it took the rest of my life to get the truth out. It just so happens, by the time I arrived home after midnight that night, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had called. So I called him, and he said he was about to walk out the door, but he answered the phone. And what I said to him, if you want the truth, I'm willing to talk to you. He said, I want the truth. And when I finished, he said, I knew there was more to this case. So he actually put something on the wire that night. And of course, the next day when I was on CNN, then the white farmer's family called in to say what I did for them, how they wouldn't have their farm today if it had not been for me, and so forth. So the story started turning around even more. But they still wouldn't apologize to me. This is Tuesday. So by Wednesday, so it started on Monday. By Wednesday, Vilsack, who was the Secretary of Ag, actually finally went on the air to say that I was a good person and they had done wrong by me. And then I went into New York that same day, and I was on every network. And one of the things Whoopi Goldberg, I was on The View, she asked, did the president call yet? I said, no. And so she had a few choice things to say about it. By the time I got in the car, because I was going to the airport, my phone rang, and it was John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, calling. And he was the one telling me what had happened with Vilsack and all. And then I noticed when we hung up, I had a text message from the White House. So, yes. So they were asking me to call this number. They were trying to get in touch with me, so I called. And the young man said they wanted to arrange a call with the president. And so I had to make a decision. Do I take that call in this car where I had a person? CNN, once I got with them that Tuesday, they would not let me out of their sight. So there was a person in the car with me from CNN. So I'm thinking, do I take the call here or do I do it once I'm at the airport? Well, I had been with CNN since that Tuesday. I had no idea how the general public was accepting what had happened. I hadn't been in touch with, I didn't know what was happening. I'm just dealing with CNN. They say, come here, I do an interview, go over there to this table, I'm doing interviews. And so I decided, though, to take it in the car. So he set the call up. And the first thing the young lady from CNN wanted to do was pull a little small camcorder out of her purse. I'm like, no. I said, you will not tape me talking to the president. I said, once I finish, I'll do an interview with you, but you can't tape this. So the first thing he said was, oh, you're a hard person to find. Now, that's strange. He's the president of the United States. I've been with everyone, I think, in this country at that point knew I was with CNN since Tuesday. And so I let him get by with that. But he started saying, oh, you know, the issues you have been putting out this week, I'm well aware of them. I said, you don't understand those issues the way I do. Oh, yes, I do. If you read my book, you understand. And so we are back and forth. He's trying to tell me I need to read his book. I'm telling him, you don't understand these issues. So finally I said, you know what? You should come to Southwest Georgia. And he said, well, oh, Sanford Bishop is the congressman. He's been trying to get me there. Maybe I'll get to do that. And so I said, when you come, bring your wife with you. And then he told me, the young man who arranged the call, he said, if you ever need to get in touch with me, get in touch with him. And I didn't even keep the number because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not begging. You know, you ought to be able to see some of what need to happen here and make that happen. So at any rate, I went on to the airport, and that's when I first found that there were women coming up to me, thanking me for what I had done for women that week. And actually, before I left CNN, the vice president of CNN came to shake my hand to thank me for what I had done for CNN that week. Because everyone, I mean, this story just really had everyone. That was the first time people were hearing a lot about Breitbart. So I think they fingered Van Jones when he was there, and he had to leave the administration. And they had cut and spliced a lot with Reverend Wright. You know, he had fiery speeches. It wasn't totally like you saw on TV, just like with me. But again, they couldn't fight it. But they picked the wrong one when they got to me. You know, so if I had to fight for the rest of my life, that's all I've done. Since I was 17 years old, so many, many battles for justice, for equity. So anyway, we always take some young women to the United Nations. I was successful with helping to start something called the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative for Economic and Social Justice. And these are women from Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. I was the representative from Georgia. So every year we have a Young Women's Leadership program, and we have an institute at Tougaloo College every year. But we work with young women in each state throughout the year, as well as Women in Ag and Hall of Fame and lots of different programs. We have a worker-owned sewing co-op that we organize. But I always try to take some young women to the United Nations, to the Commission on the Status of Women. We were just there a little less than 2 weeks ago. And I'm at the UN and getting my ID, so I'm taking a picture for my ID, and my phone is just vibrating off the hook. I'm looking down trying to see what's going on, and Elise Durham was saying, call ASAP, Breitbart died. And my first thought was, he was such a terrible person, like, I wonder who killed him, you know? You know, so, oh my goodness. And it turns out he fell dead at 43 years old. And then, you know, by that time I had actually filed a lawsuit against him, and my lawyers wanted me to make this terrible statement, and I said, no, he has children, and as a young, I know what it means to lose a father at a young age. So I had to first argue with my lawyers, and they were threatening to stop working on my case if I didn't put out the statement they wanted, but I held strong, and they saw in the end it was the best thing. I said my heart goes out to his children, because I know what it's like to lose a father at a young age. So, yeah.
Appreciate that. Further clarification.
Thank you. Ms. Shirley, I want to thank you for lifting up the struggles that the black farmers have in the South. I have heard this. I've been growing here in Michigan since 2008, and I have heard that over and over again how difficult it is for the rural farmers to get to the marketplace with their crop. And interestingly enough, it happens here in Michigan as well. And it's so disheartening for me, being an urban farmer, being able to have this market in Detroit, but I know that my brothers and sisters in the rural areas in Michigan are struggling, and so we try and work with them. It is very difficult because of the lack of access to capital and equipment, and so we're hoping here that the 2018 Farm Bill will create more access, but I think education comes with that as well. So thank you for that. I want to also thank you for being the perfect hostess when I had the pleasure of being at Cypress Pond in Albany, Georgia, the plantation that you own. I have to tell you that when the bus drove up and we were taking that ride up the pathway, and then we saw the housing for the slaves that still exist. Spiritually, it went down to my bones. And so it's remarkable that you own it. And I am very happy and very proud for the work that you are doing. One thing I wish you would speak to, you mentioned that slave owner was the largest in the state of Georgia, and that you have successfully identified all of the slaves,
Not
I think?
all of them.
Not all, but you're working on it. Why? Why are you doing that?
I think it's important. Well, let me just help the others understand this property that we acquired. We didn't know when we acquired it, we didn't know the history of the place. The previous owner developed a system for paying for fuel at the pump, so he had lots of money. And he was really putting together a place for him and his buddies, his friends who hunt and so forth, to enjoy. But he developed ALS and died in 2008. We learned of our award in 2009 and got it at some point in 2010 and started looking for more land. We didn't give up the dream that we had from 1969, actually 68, when 8 of our people went to Israel to look at how Israel was resettling its people, and they brought the information back, and we created new communities, which became the first community land trust in this country. We will celebrate 50 years later this year in October of community land trust. My understanding is there are about 800 around the country actually using the model that we created back in 1969. So, but we didn't give up the dream. We had lost everything. And when you hear me say everything, it was everything. The new owner out of Atlanta paid a fifth of what it was worth. Our assets were worth about $5 million then. He paid $1 million, and USDA let him borrow $950,000 of that when they didn't offer us the service and options that were available to us. So we were wiped out. Once we learned of the award and started looking for more land, we wanted something close by. We didn't want to be in Lee County. So this place, we didn't even know it was on the market, because that's another thing. You'll never see a for sale sign at any of those plantations, not one. But one of the young men who grew up on the other land that we had works for FedEx and had been making deliveries there, so he knew it was on the market. So we went out one Sunday morning. The salesman came from Tallahassee. If he had been from Albany, we probably never would have been taken on the property, but he was from Tallahassee. So we met him out there. And y'all seen these bird wagons where there's seats here, captain seats up there. That's what we were riding around the place on. And when the previous owner died, they put it on the market for $21 million. That house where we met, he put $3 million just into restoring it. And you could see that he used some of the best material from wherever he could get it to restore that house. When we went to look, they had dropped the price to 6.9. But the salesman kept saying to us, just put an offer on it. Just put an offer on it. The corporation is holding, they're ready to get rid of it. So my husband said, see if they'll take $5 million for it. Well, they let us know the next day they would take $5 million, but they didn't want to include the equipment. And because we were looking at another piece of land, we got a consultant to come in to help us. But he said, you got to get Cypress Pond Plantation because of all of the improvements, but you can get it for less than $5 million and make them include the equipment. And that's what happened. We got everything for $4.5 million. So we went through this without doing any research on the land. Once we got it and started looking into it, we learned that it was once owned by the largest slave owner and the wealthiest man in the state of Georgia back in the 1800s. We learned that that antebellum house was originally built in 1851. The son, the Hartwell Hill Tarver was that person. He died that year and left it to his son. His son died in 1858. So they put everything on the market. We actually have a copy of an ad where they were selling 150 slaves from that plantation on December the 29th, 1859. Our goal is to eventually try to see where descendants of those 150 slaves live in the area. We found one. We got a quick history. Historian worked on a history of the place and found that the Phipps family, Herbert Phipps had worked with attorney C.B. King, who was the black attorney during those earlier years. Herbert actually became the chief of the Georgia Court of Appeals. His great-great-grandmother, Mary Jane, and his was a slave there. His great-great-grandfather, Littleton Phipps, was the overseer there. They had 4 children before slavery ended, but they actually married after slavery ended and had a total of 8 children. We actually have, so our goal is to eventually, there's so much we have to do there, you all. So much, but we really do want to know where, we know who bought those slaves and just trying to run everything down to see who's still in the area from those individuals. There's so much more we're trying to do in the area. We're trying to make it, see, you don't get to go to these plantations in the area. I mean, there are lots of them, but you can't just go on them. You can come to Cypress Pond, though. And so we've had, when we first acquired it, we had blessing of the land ceremonies. So we invited in the Lower Creek Indians, Hispanic, white, black, Asian, every group we could get to come to actually do their blessing ceremonies. And it was so educational. The chief of the Lower Creek Indian tribe said, because the way the land is made, there's a wooded area, there's a farming area, and there's an area around that antebellum house. She said, you gotta bless 3 areas. So we had it for 3 years, and they want us to transition that into a cultural festival, because it's just to be able to interact with each other. We think healing can happen there. So that's, I mean, what better place than a place like that that had the bad beginning, but could do so much for all of us in the area now. So I'm sorry to go on so long with that.
My name is Ernie King. I'm a retired community member. I'm trying to get my arms around what kind of bureaucrat would foreclose on a property that, was in a family ever since slavery. Were they like incompetent? Were they like bureaucratic? Were they like systemic racists or what?
I'm trying to, which piece of property?
You mentioned that there were cases where farms were being foreclosed that were in families ever since slavery days.
Right? And those individuals in those USDA offices withheld programs from black farmers. That's how we've lost so much through the years. You apply for a loan in December, it could be July, if you got it at all. And you wouldn't get what was necessary to be able to run the farm. And then they would have these supervised accounts. Most of the time, if you got it, you had to go and allow them to decide what you could do with the money. I could go case after case after case I have worked on where those workers in the USDA offices, they knew exactly what they were doing. There were other farmers who wanted that land, and they would make sure you lost it, just like with New Communities. We were doing okay until the droughts in 1976. Had a year of drought, followed by a year of drought. We went to Farmers Home Administration to get an emergency loan that we later learned even those plantations were getting. But they fought us for 3 years. 3 years it took just to get an approval to apply. And then they wouldn't approve irrigation for us. And one of the things you have to do with Farm Service Agency even today is give them a lien on all available assets. Once they get a lien on your assets, then they can engineer the foreclosure. And that's what has happened. That happened to us at New Communities, and it happened to so many farmers I have worked with through the years. Mm-hmm. There would be farmers who would want your land. Just like this guy Hawkinstown, my great-great-grandparents and great-great-great came there. I don't know when they got to Baker County, but I found them in the 1870 census, and they started out sharecropping, and they worked together. My uncle used to tell us the stories of how my great-grandfather, my grandmother's father, was the judge for everyone. He would settle disputes in the family, but he made everyone work together so that they could acquire the land that we have. And I hope the last cousin has sold this man some land, because we've been really on them. But he makes no bones about the fact that he wants all of Hawkinstown. That's no different from what happened when Itchaway was being put together, when Woodruff was doing that, and others were buying land in the area. That land was once owned by black people.
Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm B. I was told I was supposed to introduce myself. Thank you for coming. You've been such an inspiration to me for a really long time, so it just feels like a real honor for you to come and visit us here. I wanted to know a little bit about what you thought the role of co-ops and collectives is right now, and I guess also if you have any ideas on what Extension or FSA could be doing to support us more, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, I've said to black farmers through the years that agriculture has changed so much that you can't work on that little piece of land out there by yourself. You have to work with others, and that's true for a lot of people who are trying to do some things. You know, it's going to take the effort of others who think like you to try to bring some of the changes that's needed. Yeah, when my father was living and others, you know, they had the plot of land that they had, and no one talked about forming co-ops back at that time. But I think it's very, very important. But I tell you that the education has to go along with it. It's so easy to get them going, but unless there's constant training. And one of the things I know with some of the black farmers, farmers just want to farm, right? They don't want to take care of the business. And I've seen situations, I know back in the 70s, this guy came in and he didn't include new communities in it. They formed a co-op to sell peanuts, and things were going quite well for them. And so I guess initially the farmers were meeting and making decisions, and then they were going so well, they let him handle the business. Well, that was a major mistake. The guy who owned the peanut company told me that the last check they got out of him, there was a big fight in his office. He had to call the police because this guy showed up to get the money, and some farmers were on to him by then, and they showed up too. That's why I say constant training and definitely constant meeting to work together. Everybody's got to be brought along on the business end of it. So because farmers just want to farm, and they'll tell you that. But they have to learn to farm and do the business too. But I think co-ops are very important moving forward, because it's not possible for the small grower to just work out there by himself. There's too much of a need in terms of marketing, equipment, and so forth. Like the food hub, the processing, and so forth. The needs are great, and one small farmer can't handle it alone.
As we take one last question, pull out your clickers. We're going to do one more clicker question. We're just curious. How are you feeling right now after hearing tonight's talk? And raise your hand if you want to have the last question.
Thank you so much for speaking tonight. I'm Anika Vanile. I am the program coordinator for Food Literacy for All and a master's student here at the University of Michigan. I was curious what your thoughts are on shifting away from monoculture or monocrops and corn and soy as they're currently subsidized by the Farm Bill. A lot of what we've been learning about here in the Food Literacy for All series has been the need for us to move away from that and to move away from pesticides in our food system. I was just curious what your thoughts are on that and how that can be integrated in with some of the stuff that you spoke about tonight.
When I talk to my farmers, and we have a long way to go in the area where I am, they say, you can't make no money getting rid of chemicals. You know, so I have to fight that. But I know when you look at the health issues in Southwest Georgia, the cancer rate, many of the health problems that we have, we definitely have to move away from that. But we are probably an area where we'll be the last ones to go, to move into where we should be. I think more education, more funds should be allocated to helping to make those changes. We're going to pay out one way or the other. You're going to pay through health, costs and so forth, or you can pay by helping to make some of the changes that are needed. And I'm hopeful that we can get there. We are not all equal in terms of our education and understanding. And this is an area of the state where there are a lot of needs. I just won't. I started to say something else, but lots of needs. Not that they aren't in other places too, but I'm telling you, that whole fight with the Civil War just didn't end. And by the way, that house, that antebellum house on this place that we have, and it's not mine, it's the organization's. I just happen to be one of the founders of the organization from the 60s. Jefferson Davis actually spent 5 nights in that antebellum house when he was running from the Union Army. We know that because he had a dinner party there for some of the residents of Albany, and it's documented. They also say that there's some gold hidden out there somewhere that that the Confederates buried some gold somewhere. We haven't been able to find that.
Well, we'll all plan to come down and visit you and help you
Yes.
find that gold sometime. Thank you so
Yes.
much for spending time with us tonight.